Baruch Hashem, this is Mark Lichtenwalter coming to you live on this 4th day of December 2019. The guest calling number for Fundamentally Mormon is 917-889-8827. That's 917-889-8827. We are going to be reading Man-Made Manifestos of the Church and the Priesthood by Ogden Kraut. We are live streaming also on Facebook at facebook.com/LAZURUS 1977 and at youtube.com/user/God is my compass. Today is also the 6th day of Kislev according to the Hebrew calendar. And I just want to thank the Zarahemla Foundation for sending me this calendar today that I'm looking at for the Hebrew calendar. I appreciate that. I'm not exactly who it is. They had my address, though, and they sent it to me. So anyway, they had my old address, and luckily I got here before all the mail was forwarded to our new address. So anyway, I will take the phone calls after the reading. Any questions or comments can be posted at the Facebook live stream, and if they are during the show, I will try to answer them. You can also go to the chat room at the chat room's at the chat room is at blogtalkradio.com/fundamentally Mormon. I'm a little bit tired right now, so I know there's things I'm missing, but let's get into the radio program or the reading right after. FundamentallyMormon.com. If you want to read the text to this that we're going to be reading tonight, that's at FundamentallyMormon.com for the blog post date of December 4th, 2019. And you can read the full text to the Church and the Priesthood at OgdenKraut.com as well. So I will also be posting these to all of my Facebook groups. On Facebook, I am the admin of LDS Gospel Mysteries, LDS Last Days Prophecy and Gospel Discussions, and Latter-day Unity, as well as a bunch of other groups as well, and pages: Church of the Living Messiah, Messiah Ben Joseph, Zion's Redemption Bookstore, bunch of different pages on Facebook. So anyway, let's get into the dedication, and then we'll get right into the reading. O God, the Eternal Father, Jehovah our Elohim, we come to thee in the name of thy Son, Yeshua, our Messiah. We thank thee, Father, for all of our many blessings. We ask thee, Father, to watch out over us as we go about our daily business. We dedicate this time unto thee to read these things, that we might understand things in the history of the restored church. We love thee, Father, and we desire to do thy will, that Zion might be redeemed. We ask for thy blessings and thy Spirit to be with us. And we say these things in thy Son's holy name, even Yeshua, our Messiah, or Jesus the Christ. Amen. They have taken crafty counsel against thy people and consulted against thy hidden ones. They have said, come, let us cut them off from being a nation, that the name of Israel may no more be in remembrance. For they have consulted together with one consent. They are confederate against thee. Psalms chapter 83, verses 3 through 5. The kings of the earth set themselves, and the rulers take counsel together against the Lord, or against Jehovah our Elohim, and against his anointed, saying, let us break their bands asunder and cast away their cords from us. Psalms chapter 2, verses 2 through 3. In 1890, the LDS Church, its members, and the priesthood experienced perhaps the greatest trials and testings. But in this life, good and evil are continually pitted against each other. The world appears to be a great theatrical stage where universal powers are reaching out for the souls of men. It is not just a battle of armies and navies, but a contest of simple principles. The battle reaches from the throne of kings down to the secret and sacred chambers of the heart. It is an eternal conflict drawing men towards celestial light or the depths of darkness. If God has apostles, missionaries, and priesthood, so does the devil. Once again, they were to meet in a clash, not of arms, but of principles. Once again, these were the times that tried men's souls. Some of the faithful were sent to prison, while others compromised. A few even turned against their beliefs and became informants and persecutors. It was a time of decision on all levels, a time when the church leaders felt they had to make some official declarations in an effort to bring temporal relief. On December 2nd, 1889, an official declaration was issued by the church relative to an Idaho test oath law, which was unconstitutional but upheld by the Supreme Court. It was signed by the First Presidency and published in the Deseret News December 21st, 1889. On December 12th, 1889, a second official declaration was issued on the subject of blood atonement. Professor James R. Clark explained, This official declaration was a direct outgrowth of the testimony and accusation made in the case before the judge, before Judge Anderson. The presidency and the 12 considered the matter when it was decided as the mind of the council that the First Presidency and the 12 apostles get up a manifesto on the subject, such a one we can all sign. The declaration brands as false any claims that the LDS Church believed in or practiced blood atonement. The declaration or manifesto was dated December 12, 1889, and was published in the Evening and Morning News. Message of the First Presidency, Volume 3, page 183. The following is a photocopy of the December 12, 1889 official declaration showing part of pages 1 and 3. For those of you following along at fundamentallymormon.com or at ogdenkraut.com, we are on page 68. Official Declaration, Salt Lake City, December 12, 1889. To whom it may concern. In consequence of gross misrepresentation of the doctrines, aims, and practices of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, commonly called the Mormon Church, which have been promulgated for years and have recently been revived for political purposes and to prevent all aliens otherwise qualified who are members of the Mormon Church from acquiring citizenship, we deem it proper on behalf of said church to publicly deny these calumnies and enter our protest against them. We solemnly make the following declaration. That this church views the shedding of human blood with the utmost abhorrence. That we regard the killing of a human being except in conformity with the civil law as a capital crime which should be punished by shedding the blood of the criminal after a public trial before a legally constituted court of the land. Notwithstanding all the stories told about the killing of apostates, no case of this kind has ever occurred, and of course has never been established against the church we represent. Hundreds of seceders from the church have continuously resided and now live in this territory, many of whom have amassed considerable wealth through bitterly hostile to the Mormon faith and people, even those who have made it their business to fabricate the vilest falsehoods and to render them plausible by culling isolated passages out of old sermons without any explanatory mandatory context and have suffered no opportunity to escape them by vilifying and blackening the character of the people, have remained among those whom they have thus persistently culminated until the present day. Without receiving the slightest personal injury, we denounce as entirely untrue the allegation which has been made that our church favors or believes in the killing of persons who leave the church or apostatize from its doctrines. We would view a punishment of this character for such an act with the utmost horror. It is abhorrent to us and is in direct opposition with the fundamental principles of our creed. The revelations of God to this church make death penalty for capital crime and require that offenders against life and property shall be delivered up to and tried by the laws of the land. We declare that no bishop or other courts in this church claim or exercise a right to supersede, annul, or modify a judgment of any civil court. Such courts, while established to regulate Christian conduct, are purely ecclesiastical, and their punitive powers go no further than the suspension or excommunication of members from the church fellowship. That this church, while offering advice for the welfare of its members in all conditions of life, does not claim or exercise the right to interfere with citizens in the free exercise of social or political rights and privileges. The ballot in this territory is absolutely untrammeled and secret. No man's business or other secular affairs are invaded by the church or any of its officers. Free agency and the direct individual accountability to God are among the essentials of our church doctrine. All things in the church must be done by common consent, and no officer is appointed without the vote of the body. We declare that there is nothing in the ceremony of the endowment or in any doctrine, tenet, obligation, or injunction of this church, either private or public, which is hostile or intended to be hostile to the government of the United States. On the contrary, its members are under divine commandment to revere the Constitution as a heaven-inspired instrument. Utterances of prominent men in the church at a time of great excitement have been selected and grouped to convey the impression that the present members are seditious. Those expressions are made more than 30 years ago, when through the falsehoods of the recreant officials, afterwards demonstrated to be baseless troops, were sent to this afterwards demonstrated to be baseless, troops were sent to this territory and were viewed by the people in their isolated condition, 1,500 miles from railroads, as an armed mob coming to renew the bloody persecution of years before. At that time, excitement prevailed and strong language was used, but no words of disloyalty against the government or its institutions were uttered. Public speakers confined their remarks to denouncing treacherous officials who were prostituting the powers of their position to accomplish nefarious ends. Criticism of the acts of the United States officials was not considered then, neither is it now, as treason against the nation, nor as hostility to the government. In this connection, we may say that the members of our church have never offered or intended to offer any insult to the flag of our country, but have always honored it as an ensign of laws and liberty. We also declare that this church does not claim to be an independent temporal kingdom of God, or to be an imperium in imperio, aiming to overthrow the United States or any other civil government. It has been organized by divine revelation preparatory to the second advent of the Redeemer. It proclaims that the kingdom of heaven is at hand. Its members are commanded of God to be subject unto powers that be until Christ comes, whose right it is to reign. Church government and civil governments are distinct and separate in our theory and practice, and we regard it as part of our destiny to aid in the maintenance and the perpetuity of the institution of our country. We claim no religious liberty that we are unwilling to accord to others. We ask for no civil or political rights which are not granted or guaranteed to citizens in general. We desire to be in harmony with the government and people of the United States as an integral part of the nation. We regard all attempts to exclude aliens from naturalization and citizens from the exercise of elective franchise solely because they are members of the Mormon Church as impolitic, unrepublican, and dangerous encroachments upon civil and religious liberty. Notwithstanding the wrongs we consider we have suffered through the improper execution of national laws, we regard those wrongs as the acts of men and not the government. And we intend, by the help of the omnipotence, to remain firm in our fealty and steadfastness in the maintenance of constitutional principles and the integrity of this republic. We earnestly appeal to the American press and people not to condemn the Latter-day Saints unheard. Must we always be judged by the misrepresentations of our enemies and never be accorded a fair opportunity of representing ourselves? In the name of justice, reason, and humanity, we ask for a suspension of national and unpopular judgment until a full investigation can be had and all facts connected with what is called the Mormon question can be known. And we appeal to the eternal judge of all men and nations to aid us in our vindication of our righteous cause. Wilfred Woodruff, George Q. Cannon, Joseph F. Smith. Presidency of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. Lorenzo Snow, Franklin D. Richards, Brigham Young, Moses Thatcher, Francis Lyman, John Henry Smith, George Teasdale, Heber J. Grant, John W. Taylor, W. Merrill, H. Lund, Abraham H. Cannon, members of the Council of the Apostles, George W. Young, Daniel H. Wells, counselors. All right, so we're on page 69, and it looks like we're having a problem tonight with the Facebook live stream, so it's not working, and I don't know why. So it just keeps saying starting live video, and it doesn't start, so it is what it is. Of course, my wife, so my daughters got home today at 1, and so I slept until, I don't know, 6:30 or something like that, and then I got up, and tonight's Wednesday night, and my wife went to a church thing, so I couldn't use her phone to do the live stream, so I thought I would try to do a live stream on Facebook and one on YouTube, and it just doesn't work because the internet here is so sketchy. So hopefully everything records good on the Facebook live stream. So if anybody is, well, I can't tell the people on Facebook, but you know what? I did post the links to the Blog Talk Radio. So if people want to go on there, I guess they can go on there. But I wish I could do everything that I want to do. It's just I've got I've got limits that I can't make the internet better than it is. Although next summer or next year they said they're going to get fiber out to us, so that'll be nice. All right, so we're on page 69 of The Church and the Priesthood by Ogden Kraut, which you can read for free online at ogdenkraut.com. Click on Read Ogden's books and then scroll down to The Church and the Priesthood. We're on page 69. You can also find all the text to what we're reading tonight at fundamentallyMormon.com blog post for the December 4th, 2019 blog post. So continuing on with page 69. A few months later came the third official declaration or manifesto from the LDS Church. This one pertained to plural marriage. All three of these manifestos were intended to soften the prejudices and the persecution from a hostile nation. In 1887, the United States carried out an astonishing act. A nation founded upon the principles of religious freedom, which had enshrined that principle in its Constitution's Bill of Rights, passed a law that dissolved a church. So what drives me nuts, like on the 4th of July now, I believe that the Constitution is next to Scripture, okay? But as a fundamentalist Mormon and as just a historian, the things that the federal government has done to destroy religious freedom in this country is disgusting and unconstitutional. I cannot be a patriot to a nation, especially with all the political mess that is always going on, the corruption and everything. I can stand as a patriot with the Constitution, but I don't understand why people are so gung-ho about, like, loving this country so much when it destroys, for instance, like polygamy. Like, that's a religious thing for Mormons, for Muslims, and for Jews. Orthodox Jews who follow the Torah perfectly, there must be polygamy among them as well. If they're going to follow the Torah, which says not to add to or take away from the words of this law or this instruction, there has to be polygamy. But the government is going to force, in a free religious country, that those things cannot be done without being subject to the point of the gun under penalty of federal law and state law, unconstitutional. The fact that we can't have United Orders because the government wants to get in everything, unconstitutional. And I just don't understand how people can be so patriotic. Yeah, I love the fireworks and whatever. I've read biographies on George Washington and John Taylor and others. I understand the history of the United States from what I've read. And I totally stand with the Founding Fathers and the Constitution and those rights which are supposed to be unalienable or unalienable. It's unalienable, by the way. But we don't get those rights in this country. And if any of you know what has happened in Short Creek, down in Hillsdale, the FLDS people, over the last 70, 80 years, it is a disgrace. Now, and I'm not talking about Warren Jeffs or any of those false prophets. I'm talking about the fact that these people want to live out their religious liberties and their for just to be polygamists. Okay, not to like marry children, which is what Warren Jeffs was doing, which was horrible. But for grown men and women to decide to live a religious system with United Orders and plural celestial marriage, and living the other tenets of their religion, and the government goes in with the behest of the LDS Church and its authority and the state of Utah and Arizona to lock these people up and take their children and tear apart their families, which is a thing, which has happened, which just happened a couple of years ago, maybe it's been 10 years, down in Texas. I don't know. I stand against it. I stand for right and truth. And if certain individuals are breaking certain laws, they should be gone after. But as a religious group, no. But that's what happens. Oh, let's just pit all the fundamentalists. And you know the thing that drives me nuts? I know I'm getting on a rant. The LDS Church wants its members to think that there is only one sort of fundamentalist and that they all follow Warren Jeffs. There are thousands, tens of thousands of fundamentalists both within the church and without the church, and very few of them by number are fundamentalists, are from the Church of the Fundamentalist Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, which is Warren Jeffs' church. You've got the AUB, you've got the Righteous Branch of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, you have my church, the Church of the Living Messiah, and many, many independent fundamentalists who remain within the LDS Church or are just independent. I've got plenty of friends that don't go to any churches. We try to have cottage meetings and stuff together as independent fundamentalists, but we don't all belong to the FLDS Church down in Short Creek or Hillsdale. I can't remember what the other name of it's called. I'm trying to think of the town. I've been there plenty of times, but I just can't remember it. Hillsdale is the one. It's right on the border of Utah and Arizona. Hillsdale's on the Arizona side, and then you've got the Utah side, which is, I can't remember. Anyway, it doesn't matter. Let's get on with the reading. Let's see here. The Edmunds-Tucker Act of 1882 took direct aim at ending polygamy, and the Edmunds-Tucker Act of 1887 went far beyond authorizing polygamous or polyg hunts, as they called them. It set out to destroy the church's temporal kingdom. And quote Mormon America R.J. Ostling, page 76. Thus a terrible burden was placed on the shoulders of President Wilford Woodruff. The United States government had become a vicious mob and was stealing, destroying, or throwing good men into prison, and women as well, and mostly men, but they do throw women in, and they take the children and throw them into foster cares. The vast majority of the Mormon people were opposed to living plural marriage, but were suffering because of the actions of a small minority. In this quandary, Woodruff tried to find a satisfactory solution. However, most of the answers were not supportive of the priesthood and its laws. A few months previously, the Lord had revealed to President Woodruff, and this is a revelation that Woodruff received, I believe in 1889, but it could be the 1887 revelation. Let not my servants who are called to the presidency of my church deny my word or my law, which concerns the salvation of the children of men. My kingdom shall roll forth, and that's a quote, but that's also part of the revelation that was received by Wilford Woodruff when he inquired of the Lord about it. A written revelation that the church wants to hide. Anyway, but that's taken from a quote, my kingdom shall roll forth, LDS Manual, page 58, also Messages of the First Presidency, Volume 3, page 175. Thus, Woodruff was caught between the United States government and most church members on one side of the Word of God, the priesthood, and the polygamists on the other. Some type of compromise seemed inevitable, and he presented such to the Quorum of the 12, or on page 70 of The Church and the Priesthood by Ogden Kraut, which you can read at fundamentallimormon.com. Although Wilford Woodruff had been a vocal opponent to any form of concession with the government concerning plural marriage during the Taylor administration, when the leadership of the church fell on him as senior apostle, he began to seek avenues of compromise. Now, you want to read a good book about this? Go read Compromise and Concession by Ogden Kraut, which you can read for free at ogdenkraut.com. Compromise and Concessions. During the next 3 years, he would present to the quorum on at least two occasions drafts of documents that would relinquish plural marriage. Both were soundly rejected by the rest of the Quorum of the 12, and, quote, Collected Discourses by Brian Stoy, Volume 2, pages 23 through 24. Wilford Woodruff also had admitted, quote, "After I became president of the church, I did not advocate the practice of this principle among our people, but that was what I saw before me, and it was upon the grounds that I issued the manifesto." Okay. That was upon the grounds that I issued the manifesto. Let me just try to reboot this stupid thing here. I believe it was my duty and the duty of our people to obey the law. Deseret News Weekly, October 20th, 1891. Actually, you know what? I'm not even going to mess with it. Let's see here. It'll probably just create havoc on the live stream for the YouTube video, so I'm just not doing a Facebook Live for this video. I might do one for the next one that I do later on. So, President Woodruff was also caught between the loud clamor of the people and his own silent conviction of the truthfulness of this marriage covenant. This was God's covenant, a spiritual contract that should not be broken. Once the saints had entered into such eternal covenants, they should not look back. Lot's wife taught us that. Reverend George Peters, author of the 3-volume set on the theocratic kingdom, wrote a precious gem that should be an anchor to our souls. He said, "Any theory, inference, or doctrine which militates against the covenants is not only open to grave suspicion, but must be rejected, no matter by whom presented, however eloquently urged. God does not contradict himself." Theocratic Kingdom, Peters, Volume 3, page 565, or on page 71 of The Church and the Priesthood. A similar test had been experienced by President John Taylor 5 years before. Quote, "There had been some talk about President Taylor issuing a revelation abolishing the system of marriage. When a revelation of that kind is given, it will be when the Lord has no use for the saints." Deseret News, April 6, 1885. Until now, there had been no literal shots fired and no one had been killed, but Brigham Young hadn't been that concerned if it were to happen, for he commented, "Suppose that the wicked kill us. Who cares? They never will kill any, but what it will swell the kingdom a little faster." Journal of Discourses, Volume 2, page 374. Under such stressful conditions, Wilford Woodruff issued the Manifesto of 1889, in actuality a press release with the hope it would have peaceful results. Page 72. To whom it may concern. Press dispatches having been sent for political purposes from Salt Lake City, which have been widely published to the effect that the Utah Commission, in their recent report to the Secretary of the Interior, alleged that plural marriages are still being solemnized and that 40 or more such marriages have been contracted in Utah since last June or during the past year. Also that in public discourses, the leaders of the church have taught, encouraged, and urged the continuance of the practice of polygamy. I, therefore, as president of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, do hereby in most solemnly manner declare that these charges are false. We are not teaching polygamy or plural marriage, nor permitting any person to enter into its practice, and I deny that either 40 or any number of plural marriages have during that time been solemnized in our temple or any other place in the territory. How can he say that? Because he wouldn't know, but whatever. I'm a little bit disgusted on how quickly they give up living what they believe to be something that is required for exaltation because the government decides to persecute them. It's sad, really. It really is. And that's why there's fundamentalists, because the fundamentalists are going to live God's law regardless of what what anybody says, because who do we obey, God or man? Anyway, one case has been reported in which the parties alleged that the marriage was performed in the endowment house in Salt Lake City in the spring of 1889, but I have not been able to learn who performed that ceremony. Whatever was done in the manner was without my knowledge. In consequence of this alleged occurrence, the endowment house was, by my instruction, taken down without delay. So they destroy an endowment house because of an allegation. Inasmuch as laws have been enacted by Congress forbidding plural marriage, which laws have been pronounced unconstitutional by the court of last resort, I hereby declare my intention to submit to those laws and to use my influence with the members of the church over which I preside to have them do likewise. There is nothing in my teachings to the church or to those of my associates during the time specified which can reasonably construed to inculcate or encourage polygamy. And when any elder of the church has used language which appeared to convey any such teachings has been promptly removed. So let's get rid of anybody who tries to teach God's laws. Don't talk about what Brigham or John Taylor said. Let's just get away from it because we're worried that somebody's going to flip out about it. And now I publicly declare that my advice to the Latter-day Saints is to refrain from contracting any marriage forbidden by the law of the land. Signed, Wilford Woodruff, President of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. Page 73 of the Church and the Priesthood. Important ideas to point out regarding the manifesto are: it was addressed to whom it may concern. We must decide who that might be. Was it the government, the church, the individual church member, lawyers, or Gentiles? It didn't say. It began as an answer to and was mostly concerned with press dispatches. It appeared to be written for them. Wilford Woodruff said, I deny that either 40 or any number of plural marriages have during that period been solemnized in our temples or any other place in the territory. He knew, however, because he was lying for the Lord, which is still a sin, a grave sin, whatever. He knew, however, that these marriages were being performed in Canada and Mexico. Then because someone had performed a plural marriage in the endowment house, he said, in consequence of this alleged occurrence, the endowment house was by my instructions, taken down without delay. Endowment houses is a place where people could go get sealings and stuff, live sealings. So temples, according to LDS theology, at least it used to be, are for the dead, right? John Taylor, he actually was sealed to some of his wives and did sealings in a grove of trees. They did the endowments in a grove of trees. They created endowment houses so that people could receive their endowments and other ordinances for the living. Before the temples were able to be set up. So, in fact, they used to do baptisms for the dead in the Mississippi River, but we were told in Section 124 that once a temple's built that we should do it there. So anyway, I know a lot of LDS people don't know this history. They don't know their own history. They know a whitewashed version of their own history, but okay, let's continue on. Since Congress had forbidden plural marriages, Wilford Woodruff declared his intention was to submit to those laws, which he disregarded 7 years later when he was sealed to a Palestinian lady lecturer, Miss Lydia Montford. Wilford Woodruff personally said he would submit to those laws and would use my influence with the members of the church to have them do likewise. This was his influence, rather than God's revelation. So this is him doing it. This isn't God telling you. Because we know through the revelations given by God to the church members, John Taylor and Wilford Woodruff between the 1880 and 1890s, in that 10-year time period, that they were told continually not to give in to the laws, not give in to the government, make no promises. How can I revoke my law? It's an everlasting law. So what Wilford Woodruff did, he did it on his own. He didn't get instruction from God to do this. And the Manifesto was not a revelation. Charles W. Penrose, who was an apostle in the church, is the one who wrote it. He admitted to that. This was his influence rather than God's revelation. When any elder of the church used language to encourage the practice of plural marriage, he has been promptly reproved. Page 74. When Woodruff said, "There is nothing in my teachings or in any others that would encourage polygamy," it announced the end of the era of celestial marriage within the church. Then, in conclusion, he said, "I, Wilford Woodruff, not the Lord, now publicly declare that my advice to the Latter-day Saints is to refrain from contracting any marriage forbidden by the law of the land." So, when he's the one, Wilford Woodruff's the one that made up that whole false doctrine that the prophet can never lead you astray, which actually contradicts Scripture. It contradicts verses and passages in the Scriptures. Joseph Smith taught that anyone who contradicts the Bible, the Book of Mormon, or the Doctrine and Covenant, you can set them down as imposters. And if Wilford Woodruff was a prophet, which I believe he was, I do not believe that he was the Lord's anointed, because God calls prophets among us all. And Wilford Woodruff's right was to be a steward over the church. And so in that sense, I do believe he was a prophet, but I do not believe he's the Lord's anointed because of what I've said in the past about Section 124 and the rejection of the church in Nauvoo, which is talked about in Section 124 for those who have eyes to see and minds to understand. But he was a fallen prophet. And do you know what happened to him? He became the keynote speaker at the Bohemian Grove, the Bohemian Club, which is a very devious arm of the Illuminati. They actually do sacrifices to Moloch, the owl god, child sacrifices. They used to do them. They do them in effigy now, which means they bring basically a life-size doll and they do mock child sacrifices. But at that time, they did live sacrifices. And Wilford Woodruff was a keynote speaker at one of the meetings there because he gave in to them. He gave in to the Illuminati, to the government of Satan, and they actually murdered him the next morning. And I couldn't believe it at first when I found that, but I went and researched, and there are articles in the Salt Lake Tribune back when it happened, the New York Times, and San Francisco Herald or something. I don't know. I found 3 different historical news clippings or articles about the subject where it states he was a keynote speaker at the Bohemian Club and he died the next day. And so we know by forensic knowledge that Brigham Young, John Taylor, and Wilford Woodruff all were poisoned to death. Brigham Young and John Taylor had levels of arsenic in their corpses when they were exhumed, and they found in both places, in their personal effects, which the church keeps everything for museum and whatever, in their coffee cups. I know that for the modern Mormon, what coffee? They're not allowed to have coffee. If you knew the history of the Word of Wisdom, you'd know that it wasn't implemented as a commandment until Heber J. Grant. I don't want to get into that. But in their coffee cups, both John Taylor and Brigham Young had arsenic. They were poisoned by their secretary, and I'm not going to say who that was, but if you know the history, you know who it was. But like the first four presidents of the church, Joseph Smith, Brigham Young, John Taylor, and Wilford Woodruff were all murdered. And there's been others as well after that time, and that's a different subject. And you know what? I should have Kevin Kraut on sometime to talk about that, because he understands that stuff in a way that he can speak about it, where I can just say a little bit here and there because I haven't really studied it a lot. But anyway, continuing on. A prophet of God will always tell you to obey the laws of God regardless of any other laws, rules, or codes. Prophets do not advise people to disobey the laws of God so that they can be convenienced by the laws of man. Since the Manifesto of 1890 was a decisive factor in priesthood authority existing outside the LDS Church organization, we need to learn more about this important document. Thus, the following issues will be discussed more in detail. Who wrote the Manifesto? Was the Manifesto a revelation? Did the Manifesto really stop plural marriage? One plural marriage manifesto or many? Comparisons and contradictions. The Manifesto in retrospect. Who wrote the Manifesto? If the Manifesto was actually a revelation from God, then we would know that the law of plural marriage was not an eternal one, that it could be revoked and is not necessary for our exaltation. In that case, fundamentalist Mormons would have no grounds for living plural celestial marriage today. Furthermore, we know that it is not an eternal priesthood law. Page 75. However, if the Manifesto is not a revelation from God, then there must be evidence to prove it. A thorough study of the Manifesto is vital to correctly understand priesthood today. First of all, let's determine its sources of authorship. There is no reference made about God in the text. It does not say, "Thus saith the Lord," and it is signed by only one person, Wilford Woodruff, not by common consent, although according to the following information, he did not write it either. Shortly after the turn of the 19th century, a missionary serving in England and Wales by the name of Thomas R. Rosser had an experience that indicated the true authorship of the Manifesto. In a letter to Robert C. Newson, of Salt Lake City, dated August 4th, 1956, Rosser related the following account. Then I went back to Bristol, England, my headquarters, to a conference which was held Sunday, May 24th, 1908. On Monday morning, the 25th, our conference priesthood meeting was held, which lasted 4 hours and a half. After the preliminary exercises, President Charles W. Penrose asked if any of the brethren had any questions on their mind, and if so, to present them now before he delivered his message to us. Up went my hand. "All right," he said. "President Penrose," I said, "I have heard much discussion on the principle of plural marriage, some saying that it was withdrawn from the earth and that the Manifesto was a revelation from God. Dear President, what about this case?" Then I related to him the testimony of the sister, which is written above, and then I asked him, why should she receive this testimony if God has withdrawn the principle from the earth and the Manifesto is a true revelation from God? President Penrose then rose to his feet, scratched the side of his head with his right hand for a moment or so, then stretched out his hand towards us and said, "Brethren, I will answer that question, if you will keep it under your hats. I, Charles W. Penrose, wrote the Manifesto with the assistance of Frank J. Cannon and John White. It is no revelation from God, for I wrote it." Wilford Woodruff signed it to beat the devil at his own game. Brethren, how can God withdraw an everlasting principle from the earth? He has not and cannot, and I testify to you as a servant of God that it is true. The reason this statement is given is because I have heard so much discussion as to whether or not the manifesto is a revelation from God. So I wish to relate herewith the understanding given to us by the Bristol Conference by Charles W. Penrose on May 25th, 1908. Sincerely, your brother, O.S. Thomas J. Rosser. Entire letter is quoted in The Holy Priesthood by Ogden Kraut, Volume 6, page 264 and 265, which you can read at ogdenkraut.com. Click on Read Ogden's Books. Scroll down to The Holy Priesthood, Volume 6, and then you can go right down to it. I've never gone through them. I mean, I've read them, but I haven't read them on a radio show, and that's one of the ones that I am scared of. It's like a Mount Everest. Like I said that about 95 Thesis, but that one really is like a Mount Everest because it's so huge. It's like volumes, it's a lot to read. So the LDS Church responded to this information by saying that they had no record of Rosser or Penrose being in Wells in May 1908. However, the Wells meeting had been moved to Bristol according to the following report recorded in the Millennial Star. See, they say, oh, we don't know anything about that, but we find evidence that, yeah, that meeting really did happen. It drives me nuts. We should deny that Charles Penrose was even there, so that what he was purported to say is done away with. So don't worry. It's like the wizard in the Wizard of Oz. Don't pay attention to the man behind the curtain. He does not exist. Only pay attention to the wizard. Oh, it drives me nuts. Anyway, the Bristol Semi-Annual Conference was held May 24th, 1908 in the Wolseley Hall, Eastville, Bristol. There were present President Charles W. Penrose, President C.G. Jarman, and 24 traveling elders of the Bristol Conference. And that's the way it's supposed to be. The 70s are supposed to accompany the 12 as they go out, and Charles W. Penrose was one of the 12. They don't do that anymore. Not like they're supposed to, but that's going off in tangents I'm not going to talk about on this particular video or radio show. After singing and prayer, President Jarman gave all present to a heartily welcome, expressed his appreciation at seeing so many saints and friends present from the outlying districts. Elder R.J. Walker, Thomas J. Rosser, Frank I. Hill, and John H. Bodden gave reports to their respective branches. Their reports were very encouraging. Millennial Star, Volume 70, page 348. Page 77. Elder George Reynolds also gave his testimony that he too helped draft the manifesto. His statement was presented in the Smoot hearings in Washington, D.C. on January 1904. The chairman, I do not know, but I may have misunderstood. I understood this manifesto was inspired. Mr. Reynolds, yes, that's funny, Jeremy Reynolds, CES letter. Hey, whatever. The chairman, what is your understanding of it? Mr. Reynolds, my understanding is that it was inspired. The chairman, and when it was handed to you, it was inspired. It was an inspiration as you understood from on high, was it not? Mr. Reynolds, yes. Chairman, what business had you changing it? Mr. Reynolds, we did not change the meaning. Justification, right? The chairman, you have just stated you changed it. Mr. Reynolds, not the sense, sir. I didn't state we changed the sense. If you receive a revelation from God, what right do you have to change it? Oh, we didn't change the meaning of it. That's just like in the endowment. Oh, we didn't change the meaning of it. We just got rid of a bunch of stuff. Like if God gives something a certain way, what right does anybody else have to change it? So anyway, the chairman, but but you changed the phraseology. Mr. Reynolds, we simply put it in shape for publication, corrected the grammar, and wrote it so that the chairman, you mean to say that in an inspired communication from the Almighty, the grammar was bad, was it? You corrected the grammar of the Almighty, did you? End quote. Read Smoot Hearings, Volume 2, page 52 and 53. We're only halfway through this monster of a chapter, and oh my gosh, I'm gonna have to take a break here in a minute. But I don't have a commercial because I don't know how to do these audio clips on the radio show. I had a friend who did them before, and I don't know how. I'm so inadequate to do podcasts and all these. I don't understand things. It's amazing that I got this far in doing these radio programs because I sucked. Anyway, continuing on. Later in his testimony, he identifies two others who helped author the manifesto. Mr. Worthington, you said something about helping to write the manifesto. Will you explain that? Mr. Reynolds, President Woodruff wrote it in his own hand, and he was a very poor writer, worse, I believe, than Horace Greeley, and he gave it into the hands of three of the elders to prepare it for the press. I was one of those three. Mr. Worthington, who were the three? Mr. Reynolds, C.W. Penrose, Charles W. Penrose, John R. Winder, and myself. End quote. And that's volume 2, page 269. Thus, according to the above two separate accounts, there were at least 6 brethren who assisted in writing the manifesto, namely Wilford Woodruff, Charles W. Penrose, Frank J. Cannon, John White, John R. Winder, and George Reynolds. Isn't it amazing that so many men would be required to improve on the revelation from the Lord before it should be presented to the saints for their vote? It was often brought up that the manifesto was only a trick to beat the devil at his own game. This was mentioned by President Charles Penrose in his Bristol Missionary Conference. It also came up in the Smoot Hearings in 1904 to 1905, according to Professor Wolfe from Provo. Mr. Wolfe, there was a meeting in the Brigham Young Academy in Provo, Utah, that was addressed by B.H. Grant, a brother of the Apostle Heber J. Grant. At that meeting, Apostle John Henry Smith was present, the chairman. On what date was that? What year? Mr. Wolfe, I don't remember the year. It was in the late 90s, probably. Or it was in the late 90s, probably. Mr. Carlisle. It was after the manifesto. Mr. Wolfe, yes, sir, it was after the manifesto. On my way home, I walked several blocks with B.F. Grant and Apostle Smith, and on the way, we were talking about the conditions existing, and President Smith used these words to me, Brother Wolfe, don't you know that the manifesto is only a trick to beat the devil at his own game? That's in volume 4, page 13. Page 79. Does this sound like a description of a revelation from God? The Salt Lake Tribune of January 16, 1906, exposed this same plot behind the manifesto. The headlines read, Manifesto only trick to beat the devil at his own game. Church schemers decided on a political manifesto with the federal government to beat them at their own game. They conceived the idea that if they made a polygamy concession with the government, they could then obtain statehood. As a state, they would introduce a law that would provide protection for those living plural marriage. Utah gained its statehood and finally introduced a bill which would allow the religious practice of plural marriage in the state. Senate Bill number 113 was introduced on March 6, 1901 by Abel John Evans. It was to amend Section 4611 of the revised statute of Utah, but the Governor Heber M. Wells, a product himself of plural marriage, vetoed the bill with the excuse that it offered the polygamists only a false hope of protection. So that the ray of hope behind issuing the manifesto was shattered within 5 years. Instead of laws being amended and instigated by the state for the protection of polygamists, the laws became worse, and